From the Alvin and Rosalie Sarachek studio, PBS Kansas presents Kansas Week.
Another fight over a series of letters that comes down to one concept: woke. What role should it play in state investments? Plus, school funding is back on the table. This time, the battle over special education and whether savings accounts are actually vouchers. But first, a series of bills designed to keep transgender Kansans out of spaces meant for women. Is it discrimination or protection? That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. Two different anti-transgender bills moved forward in the Kansas Senate this week. What authors call the Women's Bill of Rights, which bans transgender women from some public bathrooms, state prisons, and shelters, and a ban on transgender athletes in women's and girls' state-sponsored sports. I took a look at that one earlier this week.
In addition to being forced to give up our awards and our titles and our opportunities, the NCAA forced female swimmers to share a locker room with Thomas, a 6'4", 22-year-old male equipped with and exposing male genitalia.
They came from around the country and across the state.
She'll be forced into a puberty that she does not want, but that she's going to feel tortured and trapped within her own body as her voice deepens and her facial hair grows. It's for her own good that she's going to grow up to hate herself, and looking in the mirror will cause her more pain than you can ever imagine.
Sharing their perspectives as athletes, transgender women, parents, and doctors with Kansas lawmakers for a second time this year, a second year in a row, on a plan to ban transgender athletes from competing in state-sponsored sports from kindergarten through college. Last year, the governor vetoed an almost identical proposed ban, and the Kansas House was unable to overturn that veto. This year, the ban has already passed the House with a veto-proof majority. Some, from opponents to political analysts, call this move legislative overreach, almost a power grab by lawmakers, when the sports organizations like KSHA already have regulations in place on when transgender athletes can compete.
And for the legislature to just cancel that and say, no, you don't know what you're doing, we're going to legislate this instead, is a big change in governance.
If Kansas approves this ban, it would become the 19th state to do so. Several of those states are already involved in expensive and long-lasting lawsuits over the legislation.
I think you can make a strong argument for waiting. First of all, if the lawsuits are brought in federal court, they would presumably apply to all the states.
And joining us this week to break down this and several other issues, we have State Representative Sidney Carlin, a Democrat from Manhattan, who's joining us by Zoom. And on set with me, Representative Patrick Penn, a Wichita Republican, and David Seaton, managing editor of the Cowley Courier Traveler. Thank you all so much for being here. And David, I'm actually going to start with you on this one instead of our lawmakers, because we hear a lot from lawmakers on this issue. But I have to wonder, is it really as hot button of an issue, as heated of an issue in Kansas homes, as black and white as it seems to be among lawmakers?
I don't think so. This seems like a solution in search of a problem. I mean, I don't know of any local issue in our area, or I don't even know across the state. There might be, the lawmakers might know, where this has actually become a problem. To me, this is sort of a Fox News problem, and that Republican lawmakers are sort of taking a template and applying it across the states as part of this sort of anti-woke agenda. It's a phobia of what traditionally our culture of sort of deviant sexual identity. I think it's playing on fears. I mean, I'm throwing my opinion out here pretty strongly, but that's what it seems like to me. It doesn't seem like much of a problem. There was the swimmer at the national level who gained a lot of attention, and that there may have been some issues there, but that's for that governing body to I think deal with. Here, like it was pointed out, that KSHA already has rules. Schools already have their own policies, and it doesn't seem like it's been an issue that the state needs to jump in, especially considering that we're talking about people who are pretty vulnerable and are already traditionally been discriminated against, and now we're kind of targeting them. I think it's unnecessary.
All right, as our Republican, Patrick, what's your response?
Well, I noticed, and thank you for having me here today, Ms. Pilar. I noticed that in the opening you called it anti-transgender and you called it the transgender bills. None of those words ever show up anywhere in any of the legislation. So I would not call them anti-transgender. I wouldn't call them transgender bills. They are pro-women bills. The two bills I think that you're referring to, one is the Women's Bill of Rights and the other is the Fairness in Women's Sports. The Fairness in Women's Sports Act actually passed the House, and I think it passed the Senate as well. So it's now on its way to the governor.
Yes.
And now the governor, we know that she said during her campaign when she was positioning herself and saying that she's middle of the road Laura, and she literally, and her quote is, everybody knows that men should not be in girls' sports. That's her quote. So now when we send this to her, I fully, my caucus fully, the people of Kansas fully expect her to hold up her word and sign it into law, because now we've had those veto-proof majorities. When it comes to HB 2238, that's the one that we've actually heard in the House. You saw Riley Gaines, you saw a lot of different individuals come in and actually testify. We've actually had, it's not a fake or made up problem. I've listened to my constituents from both sides of the aisle and on the issue this week alone. We've been berated, castigated, cussed out. My office assistants having to listen to the voicemails from those on the left use the most horrendous language you could ever imagine as they try to purport that what they feel is what Kansas law should be. That's our job as a legislator. We're supposed to listen to our constituents and actually make a standard that appeals and applies across Kansas as a single standard. And that's what we're doing here. Now, I don't think that there should be a situation where a young lady or a young girl is erased because of how someone else feels that they identify themselves. I don't think that it's right to erase women. My mom was a woman, is a woman. My wife is a woman. I'm raising two young women. My grandmama, probably yours too, were women. They don't deserve to be erased because of how our cultural fad. I took sociology as well, and so when you said that it's you know, what used to be deviant sexual behavior, that's what I'm saying. A counterculture, subculture is now trying to assume the main culture. We know that they are, as we hear time and again, follow the science. The science is clear. Men have more muscular body mass. They have wider throats, like we saw with Riley Gaines talking about the Thomas individual, that they have bigger throats, can take in more air, they have more power, they have bigger skeletal mass and everything. All of the different things that the science says that makes it an unfair competition for my daughters to get into that arena. Usually what we hear from the left is when a man or biological male is going toe-to-toe with a female, it's called domestic violence. Now we want to erase women, we want to support seemingly domestic violence, and we want to say that women should not be allowed to go into their safe spaces, in the bathroom, in the locker room, in the prison.
You're describing men actually going and playing.
Biological men.
There's a subset, a small percentage of people who don't fall in those cabories.
Biological
men.
And
that's science fact too. And there's gender dysphoria, right, where or hermaphrodites, where they might have both biological traits. So what do you do with those people?
So Leah Thomas,
are they not allowed to play sports and participate in sports and competition?
You asked a question.
Doesn't this target them?
And I'm not into the what if. I'm into the science, and the science is plain. Leah Thomas went into the restroom and exposed himself to women. That is not a what if about hermaphrodites or anything. That's a biological man.
Heterosexual people do that too.
That's and when those
if
heterosexual men do
it doesn't matter your gender identity. If you expose yourself, that's illegal.
What happens when?
Why are we targeting?
What happens?
You
said heterosexual men do it too. What happens when heterosexual men do that?
Patrick, I'm going to step in here real quick. I love the conversation. I do, however, want to bring Sydney in on this as well because she's not on set. Sydney, as we're talking about this issue, a couple of pretty big things coming up. One, the vitriol against lawmakers because of the issue going on at the State House, but also the concerns over the science. I mean, we've just heard two different viewpoints on what the science itself says.
You know, I don't have any transgender family members, but I do have gay family members. And it's been a learning experience for me. I grew up in a time where nobody knew what the word queer meant, even though we said it. We didn't know how hurtful it was. We didn't know how deep in their genetic makeup that was. Now that we know these things, I think we must take the opportunity to use what we're learning in society and be more kind to people. We've had constituents have said this, but not to me, maybe to Patrick or maybe to somebody who carries the bill, but I've never had a constituent say that to me, that they were worried about the athletics. More people in my community are, well, I'm not saying they don't have that feeling. I can't say that. But I think there are ways to ascertain whether someone is carrying too much testosterone to be considered a male. But we're not talking about those kinds of things, or to be considered a female, I'm sorry. We're not talking about those things. We're talking about the social aspect of it. Someone feeling, the woman who testified who does not live in Kansas, and there was no testimony like that from Kansas. I understand. I wasn't in that committee. But we're hearing from people out of state. We're not hearing from people who have concerns in Kansas. And the 19 states that have done this, they're all part of an organization of states that has conferences and passes out bills, and they come home and try to pass them in our states. There are 22 states that are kind of involved in this, and every now and then you see 19, 20, 22 states have done this. Well, it's because they have people who will carry these messages at home in their states, and conservative, ultra-conservative leadership that will allow it. So we're not seeing this from a majority of people. We see it, but it's not from a majority of people, and we do have to listen to all people, but it's not that prevalent. And the state's high school association and college athletic associations, they handle these things. And we had the bathroom issue years ago, not very many years ago, but Dylan's put in a unisex bathroom, and we have people have worked out those situations in society. We don't need to be mandating all these things. That's my opinion.
All right. Very quickly, because we are already running out of town.
There's one thing, and thank you for the extra time. I came into the military, and that's how I accessed the middle class. A lot of black families, the same way that they access the middle class, you're going to look at Venus and Serena, is through sports. So when you have biological men coming in, depriving women, girls, of those opportunities to gain scholarship and get into the middle class, especially in the black community, those who would say that they are for the black community, they are against the black community when they support what you call a transgender bill.
Where is
so
that
the bottom
in
line up
Kansas?
front, what I'm saying is the way that you handle this says a lot about whether or not you're hypocritical when it comes to the black community, because you are definitely saying that it's okay to deprive those young black girls of the opportunity to get scholarship and go into the middle class.
There are no transsexual black people?
So you're saying that you're stipulating that it's okay to deprive black kids of scholarship opportunity, little black girls.
No, I disagree that is actually occurring. I think that's a red herring that's being set up, because this is the latest kind of moral panic.
On balance.
Moral panic that the GOP is trying to scare up and try to.
Okay, so you're anti-GOP.
Okay.
I got it.
Please, the base of the constituency.
All right. We're going to leave this conversation here because we've got a couple other things that we do have to talk about today. Turning to marijuana, Oklahoma voters turned down a chance this week to legalize recreational use, but Kansans are still clamoring for legalization of at least medical marijuana. Will lawmakers listen? It certainly didn't seem so earlier this week, as Cake's Jackson Overstreet shows us when he talked to Oklahoma voters.
It's election day, but not in Kansas. Oklahomans are headed to the ballot box Tuesday to potentially legalize recreational marijuana.
All right, there we go, ma'am.
I can see the benefits. Of course, the more money that they spend here, the better off we are. But I can see some issues with that also.
If the ballot question passes, it would mark the third state around Kansas after Colorado and Missouri to have recreational marijuana. It's a vote that plenty in the Sunflower State are watching closely.
95% of Kansas residents are going to live within 2 hours of recreational marijuana.
Nathan Hyatt with the Kansas Cannabis Coalition says the organization has already seen plenty of people cross over into Missouri to get marijuana since recreational went active last month. He expects more of the same in the southern part of the state if Oklahoma follows suit.
I hope it really puts the pressure on them to get something passed because they're just going to lose out on Kansas tax dollars to other states.
But will lawmakers feel that pressure? Political professor Dr. Russell Aaron Fox isn't so sure.
I think that the Republican majority in Topeka is entrenched enough in their own power that the fact that Missouri does something, or that Colorado's doing something, or Oklahoma and Nebraska have done something, isn't really going to affect their thinking that much.
Hyatt says the coalition is going to ramp up lobbying efforts, especially if Oklahoma votes yes, even if some politicians are resistant right now.
A lot of the reasons we don't have a bill at this point is because of people's own self-interests. And then we're just, so we're going to start pushing in that aspect.
Now, when the week started, it seemed like medical marijuana even was dead in the Kansas Senate. But then after the Oklahoma vote, Kansas lawmakers advanced a proposal to increase not to increase funding, but to have a hearing on a bill on medical marijuana in the Senate, which was kind of a surprise when it showed up on the calendar this week. And Sydney, I'm going to come to you first on this one. This is an issue that has really been kind of waiting on the Senate to act all session.
And the Senate's going to have a hearing on medical marijuana. Is that correct? Is that what you said?
That what showed up on the schedule Thursday afternoon. Yes.
Okay, because that's all we have out there as far as I know. Well, I'm sorry, I don't remember how you asked the question, but to respond to that, the House did pass it in the past. So I think if it passes the Senate, then it will come to the House. I thought it was dead. I think recreational marijuana is a completely different matter, but I would be in favor of it myself because I think we're just asking for trouble trying to set up all the rules and everything for medical and expect people not to try to cheat because people cheat. That's the way life is, unfortunately. But Colorado had $3.4 billion in tax on or income on marijuana in 2014. I don't know what the latest number is, but we've been looking at it for a few years. So, it's too bad that we're letting our money walk across the borders. And also the relief that people really need to get from marijuana, from pain, is very important. I've been suffering with my hip, and I have a new hip, and we have legalized CBD oil in a 0.3, dosage. And I've been able to buy it over the counter. And when I was really having the most pain, I would use that occasionally, and it did help when nothing else did. And if I had a brain tumor and nothing would relieve the pain, and my sister died of pancreatic cancer, if she could have had some marijuana, medical marijuana, it would have been such a big relief to her. And it's very sad that people really actually need the pain relief they can get from marijuana. So.
Well, Patrick, I'm going to come to you next on this. This is an issue that really is not quite partisan per se. There are a lot of Republicans that do support at least medical marijuana. If it passes the Senate, do you see it passing the House?
As Representative Carlin said, the House passed this out successfully, I think, last year. I was sitting on Fed and State when we actually considered the bill, and it's up to the Senate now whether or not they actually want to pass something out. That said, I am against recreational marijuana and medical because I sat through the sausage making process, and what has actually come forward is not medicinal marijuana. Right now, if you have an issue, you can go to your doctor and get the script written for medicinal marijuana for those pain things. The way that the bill was crafted that I saw, it was recreational light, like Oklahoma or Missouri. It was basically warmed up in waiting for recreational for a gold rush to flip a switch, and as you saw on the opening, to actually do commerce on it. That's what it is. It's a commercial, recreational marijuana bill. It is not medicinal. It's not truth in advertising whatsoever because they don't want to do anything pushing it through KDHE. having pharmacy dispensing, having it regulated on the concentration of it, having the law enforcement actually understand what types of concentrations between gummies and powder or whatever the different types are, so that they can actually make sure that they are enforcing the law correctly. And because everyone and their mother, when they're putting the bill together, they're talking about barriers to entry on fees and everything like that it takes to actually get the contracts and how many should be set aside and stuff. It has absolutely nothing to do with medicinal purposes. It has everything to do with commercial purposes. And therefore, me, as a representative in here in House District 85, we would oppose it.
Now, real quickly, there was one thing you said that kind of got my attention about not having the KDHE involved. Isn't there, because of federal laws and rules, the KDHE can't be involved?
And that therein lies the rub, right? Because it's still a Schedule I narcotic, so the feds do not recognize it. So we had a group come in, one of the individuals who's one of the big players down here in Oklahoma and Missouri, setting up all of the dispensaries and everything and making millions of dollars trying to convince us of that, as well as some of the law enforcement folk as well out of KBI bringing to light those exact things. And I'll say this and I'll leave it alone. When you come into the neighborhoods, and as the gentleman who was on the commercial side said, we would put this into the minority communities because we would want them to work in the dispensaries. Didn't want them to own, but they're okay working. You are no different to me than the dope dealer who goes into the hood and sells crack to his mom so that you can make money off of their misery. I don't care about money walking across the line. It has to do with who we are as a people. If that's how we're going to make money, you must understand that all money ain't good money.
All right, and we're going to have to leave that there. We do need to talk about a couple other things. Kansas lawmakers advancing a proposal to increase funding for special education, something school districts have been asking for, but not without first attaching a few restrictions to the money and to plan opponents. Our say is nothing more than vouchers. KAKE's Stephanie Minichi has more on the governor's response to these proposed changes.
Governor Kelly was met by a welcoming group of kids at Butler County Special Education Interlocal Thursday afternoon. Some showed off their baking skills they learned from being in the program. The governor has always been supportive of special education programs. She says they're beneficial for not just the students, but for everyone.
The return on investment is so incredible. And again, not just for the people who are participating in the program, but for society as a whole.
Special Education Director April Hilliard says supporting their students should be just as important to the community as it is to them.
It's disheartening to think that we would use our students with special needs as pawns in a game of funding. Our students need support.
Hilliard says programs like theirs help prepare their students for future careers.
I'm hoping to get into Triple S and work for disabled people and help them out.
Governor Kelly, whose background is social services, mental health, expresses the importance of funding these types of programs.
We have so many people who will now be getting out of our K-12 system and going into career and life who are much more likely to be successful and be productive citizens versus citizens that we need to take care of for the rest of their lives.
The governor says she would like the bill taken out of the current bill that it's in. She wants to put it into the education budget where it belongs. The governor says she wants to start going down the path of fully funding special education in Kansas. Stephanie Minichi, KAKE News on your side.
Now, the governor didn't outright say it, Patrick, but she definitely intimated a probable veto on something like this. Does that have any effect on the making the sausage process, as you call it?
I'm so glad you brought this one up. I'm really excited about this one because I am excited to make sure that we support our Kansas parents, teachers, and our students as well. And I think that when we talk about the special education funding piece, we know that there's a formula and it gets to be a little bit of sausage making, right? The feds are supposed to be involved. The legislature fully funds up to their limit. And we had a bill, it was House Bill 2060, where we heard from our constituents and everything all over the summer that we wanted to set up a task force to get down into special ed funding, understand what the issues are, get solutions pulled in, and present that. Republicans voted overwhelmingly in support of it. Democrats voted lockstep against it. So we are trying to be a part of the solution. And like you just said, we do hope that in accordance with the governor's plan and her budget, that the Republicans will come forward and go ahead and fully fund not only education, but special education to the limits that she's asked for, and that we can actually get some money into the hands of our teachers because they deserve it. We're talking about teacher shortages. We're talking about the overburden that they have. Republicans are trying to push all that forward for the betterment of our students as well. So really, really excited about this, and I think we're going to get a win no matter what.
Okay, Sydney, Patrick's saying a win no matter what. How do you feel about it?
Well, absolutely. Last year I don't know what HB 2060 is. Was that this year or was that last year's bill?
That was this year, Task Force on Education.
I've not seen that bill. But
Patrick's saying that was this year.
Okay, I serve on appropriations. As I spend most of my day in budget meetings and budget committees, and so sometimes I miss some of these policy things, but we had a lot of discussion a year ago about the special education, and we could not get the support from the GOP. So I don't know why we two can't get together if we all want it so much. So I don't know what HB 2060 had in it that the Democrats would have objected to. But I know the governor has put us on a path in her budget to fully fund special education for the first time in a decade. And so when we don't have the money in there that we need, it affects every student in the state because they're sharing. We have to pay the bills for special education. We have to make sure every one of those kids get taken care of. So when we spend money that we don't have for special education on their needs, then the other students get less money spent on normal educational needs. So this has been a real problem for my district. It's about $2 million a year that we've been spending to take care to fill the gap, and this is why we really need to do it. 90% of the funding, I believe, is supposed to come from the federal government, and we need to get our delegation to go to work in Washington as well, and the governor is working on that as well with our congressional delegation to do what they can to support the federal requirements of funding special ed.
Yeah.
So I don't know how far we need to go with that, but I think both of us agree. So I'll have a talk with you, Patrick, and we'll figure out why we didn't vote
She's
together.
hitting the nails all over the head, and that's what I wanted to say. The Sunflower Education Equity Act that was heard in K through 12 education budget had a number of amendments added on this week to include the governor's budget. So this is truly a bipartisan bill that's going to get it done.
Okay, well, we'll have to wait and see what happens because we are out of time for today. Thank you again for joining us, Patrick, David, and Sydney. We'd also like to thank our news partners at KSN News, the Wichita Eagle, and Cake News for sharing their materials with us. For now, stay safe and have a great week.